The Galactic Council chamber fell silent when Ambassador Crixtal raised his forearms to speak. His scales shifted from calm blue to an agitated orange as he looked at the data floating before him. "We have made a terrible mistake," he said. "The humans should never have been given Colony World 7. Around the massive circular chamber, representatives from 100 different species murmured among themselves. Some clicked their mandibles, others whistled through breathing tubes, a few simply blinked their many eyes in confusion. High Chancellor Vorn, an ancient being who looked like a floating jellyfish made of light, drifted toward the center of the room. "Explain yourself, Ambassador. The humans were given that world precisely because it was considered uninhabitable. It was a test. We expected them to fail." "That is exactly the problem," Crixtal said. "They did not fail, they adapted." On the far side of the chamber, a small group of human diplomats sat quietly. Among them was Sarah Chen, Earth's representative to the Council. She was a middle-aged woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and calm eyes that had seen many strange things in her 30 years of service. She listened carefully but showed no reaction. The data display changed to show Colony World 7, also known as Perdition's Edge. It was a nightmare planet. The atmosphere shifted between toxic and barely breathable every few hours. The temperature swung from burning hot to freezing cold within a single day. The native life forms were all predators that had evolved to kill anything that moved. The ground itself was unstable, prone to sudden sinkholes and earthquakes. "When we gave the humans this world," Crixtal continued, "we expected them to request a different assignment within one standard year. Every other species that attempted to colonize Perdition's Edge abandoned it within months. The Florax lasted 8 days. The Krillvan managed 42 days before their entire colony perished." He paused and his scales turned a darker shade of orange. "The humans have been there for 15 years. Their population has grown from 5,000 to over 200,000. The chamber erupted in noise. Species that had never agreed on anything suddenly found common ground in their disbelief. How was this possible? What trick had the humans used? Chancellor Vorn raised a tendril for silence. "Show us the evidence." The display shifted to show actual footage from Colony World 7. What appeared on screen made several council members gasp, hiss, or produce whatever sound their species made when shocked. The human colony was thriving, but it looked nothing like any colony any of them had ever seen. The buildings were not permanent structures. They were modular units that could be broken down and moved within hours. When the ground became unstable, the humans simply picked up their homes and relocated them. When the atmosphere turned toxic, they sealed themselves inside filtered domes that they had built from materials found on the planet itself. The footage showed humans working outside during what should have been lethal conditions. They wore suits that seemed to change and adapt as they moved. When the temperature dropped, the suits thickened. When predators approached, the suits released chemicals that drove them away. When the ground began to shake, the humans did not run in panic. They calmly gathered their equipment and moved to pre-designated safe zones. "They call those suits second skins," Crixtal explained. "They developed them within the first 2 years on the planet. The technology adapts in real time to whatever threat it encounters. Our scientists have studied the designs. They say it should not work, too many variables, too much unpredictability, but somehow the humans made it work." Sarah Chen allowed herself a small smile. She knew the real story behind those suits. The first generation had been a disaster. Hundreds of colonists had died testing early prototypes, but humanity did not give up. They learned from each failure, they improved, they adapted. That was what the other species did not understand. Humanity's greatest strength was not intelligence or strength or technology. It was the simple, stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The display showed more footage. Human farmers growing food in underground hydroponic chambers that could be sealed in seconds if the air turned poisonous. Human hunters tracking the deadly predators of Perdition's Edge, learning their patterns, and eventually domesticating some of the smaller species. Human children playing in specially designed areas that could detect threats before they became dangerous. But the most shocking footage came last. It showed a massive storm approaching a human settlement. The storms on Perdition's Edge were legendary. They combined toxic gases, extreme winds, and temperatures that could shift by 50 degrees within minutes. They had destroyed every attempt at colonization by every other species. The humans saw the storm coming. They had exactly 17 minutes to prepare. In that time, they did something remarkable. The entire settlement folded in on itself. Buildings collapsed into compact units. Those units were loaded onto vehicles. The vehicles drove into massive underground bunkers that the humans had dug during their first year on the planet. Within 15 minutes, 5,000 humans and all their equipment had simply vanished below ground. The storm passed overhead, destroying everything on the surface. 20 minutes later, the humans emerged. Within 2 hours, their settlement was rebuilt and operational. "They do this regularly," Crystal said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes several times per month. They have turned disaster response into a routine. Our analysts say that a human child on Perdition's Edge has better survival instincts than a trained military officer from most other species." Chancellor Vorn floated in silence for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "Why do you say this was a mistake, Ambassador? It seems the humans have done exactly what we asked. They have colonized a world we considered worthless." Crystal's scales turned pale, almost white. It was the color of fear. "Because we gave them this world as a test, we wanted to see if they would fail. We wanted a reason to deny them further expansion into the galaxy. We wanted to prove that they were too weak, too fragile, too primitive to compete with established species." He turned to look directly at Sarah Chen. "Instead, we have taught them to survive anything. We have forced them to evolve faster than any species in recorded history. We have created exactly what we feared most, a species that cannot be stopped." Sarah Chen stood slowly. Every eye, sensor, and optical device in the chamber turned to focus on her. "With respect, Ambassador," she said, her voice calm and clear, "you did not create us. You simply revealed what we already were. Humanity has always been this way. We survived ice ages and famines. We survived plagues and wars. We survived disasters that should have ended us 1,000 times over." She paused, looking around the chamber at the representatives of 100 species that had spread across the galaxy, while humanity was still learning to make fire. "You thought you were testing us," she continued, "but we were not being tested, we were being trained, and now that our training is complete, I think it is time we showed the rest of the galaxy what survival through adaptation actually looks like." The chamber fell silent once more. No one knew what to say. 3 months later, the first reports began coming in from the frontier worlds. Admiral Thexnar of the Dominion Fleet read the data on his command screen and felt his primary hearts begin to beat faster. The reports should not have been possible. They described events that violated everything he knew about warfare, colonization, and the fundamental laws of survival. The humans were expanding. Not slowly as other species did, carefully selecting worlds that matched their biological requirements. Not cautiously building infrastructure over centuries before attempting to establish permanent settlements. No, the humans were expanding fast, recklessly, impossibly. They were taking worlds that no one else wanted. World after world, the pattern was the same. A planet that had been deemed uninhabitable, a small human colony ship, a few thousand volunteers, and then within years instead of centuries, a thriving settlement. On Glacier Prime, a world where the temperature never rose above -40 degrees, humans had built heated cities beneath the ice. They harvested energy from thermal vents. They raised food in vast greenhouses that glowed like jewels in the eternal darkness. On Furnace, a planet so close to its sun that the dayside temperature melted most metals, humans had built mobile cities that traveled constantly around the planet, always staying in the narrow band of twilight where conditions were merely terrible instead of instantly fatal. On Pressure, a world with an atmosphere so dense that most species would be crushed instantly, humans had adapted. They lived in suits that supported their bodies. They moved slowly, carefully, like deep-sea divers exploring an alien ocean, but they survived, they thrived. Admiral Thexnar had served the Dominion for 200 years. He had seen species rise and fall. He had watched empires crumble and new civilizations emerge from the ashes, but he had never seen anything like the humans. His second-in-command, a younger officer named Krill, approached his station. "Sir, we have received a communication from the Galactic Council. They want a full report on human expansion activities." "Tell them I am still gathering data," Thexnar replied, "and tell them to be patient. The humans are moving faster than I can document." "Sir," Krill's expression showed confusion. "How is that possible? Our surveillance systems are state-of-the-art. We should be able to track every human vessel in the sector." Thexnar turned to face his officer. Have you ever watched humans, Krill? Have you ever actually observed how they operate? I have reviewed the standard briefings, sir. That is not what I asked. Thexnar called up a display showing a human colony ship in transit. Watch this, watch closely. The ship was small by galactic standards, barely larger than a standard cargo hauler. It carried 3,000 humans, along with all the equipment they would need to establish a new settlement. By Dominion standards, it was hopelessly inadequate for colonization purposes. But then something strange happened. The ship encountered an asteroid field, a minor obstacle but one that most vessels would navigate around. It would take perhaps an additional 2 days to find a safe path. The human ship did not navigate around. Instead, it slowed down and began harvesting asteroids. Mining drones deployed from the ship's hull, extracting metals and minerals. Within hours, the ship's raw material reserves had doubled. By the time it cleared the asteroid field, it had gathered enough resources to support the colony for an additional year. They do not see obstacles, Thexnar explained. They see opportunities. Every problem becomes a resource. Every disaster becomes a lesson. Every failure becomes a foundation for future success. Krill studied the display, but surely this approach has limits. They cannot adapt to everything. Can they not? Thexnar called up another display, this one showing historical data. Their homeworld Earth is one of the most geologically active planets in the galaxy. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, floods. Most species would have evolved on a calmer world. Most species would not have survived. He scrolled through images of human history. Cities destroyed by disasters and rebuilt. Civilizations collapsing and new ones rising from the ruins. Wars that killed millions, followed by periods of unprecedented growth and innovation. They did not just survive these challenges, Thexnar continued. They were shaped by them. Their entire psychology, their culture, their technology, all of it evolved around one simple principle: that which does not kill them makes them stronger. That is just a saying, sir, a piece of primitive philosophy. Is it? Thexnar turned off the display. Tell me, Krill, what is the longest continuous civilization in the Dominion? Krill thought for a moment. The Eternals of Axis Prime. They have maintained their society for approximately 12,000 years. And in that time, how much have they changed? Very little, sir. That is the source of their stability. They identified an optimal way of living and have maintained it ever since. Thexnar nodded slowly. The humans have only been a spacefaring species for 200 years. In that time, they have undergone more changes than the Eternals have experienced in their entire history. They have revolutionized their technology dozens of times. They have restructured their societies repeatedly. They have adapted to environments that would have destroyed any other species. He paused, letting the words sink in. The Eternals survive by remaining the same. The humans survive by constantly becoming something new. And that, Krill, is why I am afraid. An alert sounded on the command console. Krill checked the readings and his face went pale. Sir, we have detected a human vessel entering the dead zone. Thexnar felt his heart skip several beats. The dead zone was a region of space that had been quarantined for 10,000 years. The radiation levels were lethal to every known species. The gravitational anomalies could tear a ship apart in seconds. Not even automated probes could survive there for long. Are you certain? He asked. Yes, sir. The vessel is transmitting a human identification code. They are requesting permission to establish a research station in the zone's outer perimeter. Thexnar stood very still for a long moment. Then he began to laugh. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who has finally understood a terrible joke that the universe has been telling for a very long time. Let them, he said finally, let them go into the dead zone. Let them try to survive where no one else can. And when they succeed, because they will succeed, make sure the council receives my report. Sir, what should the report say? Thexnar looked out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, humans were doing the impossible, again. It should say that we need to stop testing the humans, he said quietly, because every test we give them only makes them stronger. 5 years passed. On Earth, in the United Human Territories headquarters, General Marcus Webb studied the reports from across the galaxy and allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The expansion was proceeding even better than projected. Human colonies now existed on 47 worlds that the Galactic Council had deemed uninhabitable. Each colony had developed its own unique adaptations to local conditions. Each had shared those adaptations with the others. The collective knowledge of humanity was growing at an exponential rate. But Webb knew that the real test was still coming. He turned to face the assembled officers and scientists in the briefing room. They represented the best humanity had to offer. Military strategists who had defended colonies against everything from hostile wildlife to radiation storms, engineers who had designed technology that other species called impossible, and biologists who had figured out how to help humans survive in environments that should have killed them instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Webb began, "we have received communication from the Galactic Council. They want to negotiate." The room stirred. This was unexpected. For 15 years, the Council had ignored humanity's expansion into the unwanted corners of the galaxy. They had assumed the humans would eventually fail, would eventually ask for help, would eventually prove that they were inferior. "What do they want?" asked Dr. Lisa Park, the chief scientist of the Adaptation program. "They want to understand how we do it," Webb replied. "They want access to our technology. They want to learn our methods." "And in exchange?" Webb smiled grimly. "They are offering us membership in the Council, full voting rights, access to their established trade networks, recognition as a major galactic power." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This was everything humanity had been working toward. This was validation on a scale that previous generations could only dream of. But Webb was not finished. "There is a catch," he continued. "They want us to stop expanding into dangerous worlds. They say our activities are destabilizing the galactic order. They are worried that other species will feel pressured to attempt similar colonization efforts with predictably fatal results." Dr. Park laughed bitterly. "They are worried that we are making them look bad." Essentially, yes, they have spent thousands of years building a civilization based on careful, controlled expansion. We have spent 15 years showing that their approach is not the only way. They do not like what that implies about their own limitations. A young officer named James Cooper raised his hand. "Sir, what is our response?" Webb looked around the room at the men and women who had made the impossible possible. They had survived everything the galaxy could throw at them. They had adapted, evolved, and overcome challenges that would have destroyed any other species. "Our response," he said slowly, "is to decline their offer." The room erupted in surprised conversation. Decline after everything they had worked for. Webb raised his hand for silence. "Let me explain. The Council is not offering us partnership. They are offering us a leash. They want to control our expansion because they are afraid of what we might become. They want to limit our growth because they cannot match it." He activated a display showing a map of the galaxy. Human colonies were marked in blue, Council-controlled space was marked in green, and scattered throughout in red were thousands of worlds that no one had claimed because no one could survive there. "We have barely begun," Webb said. "Those red marks represent our future. Each one is a world where humanity can grow, adapt, and thrive. Each one is a challenge that will make us stronger." He pointed to a region of dense red marks near the galactic core. "The Council has never ventured into these areas. They consider them off-limits, impossible death traps, but we know better. We have proven that there is no such thing as an uninhabitable world. There are only worlds that require more adaptation." Dr. Park stepped forward. "General, with respect, the galactic core region presents challenges unlike anything we have faced before. The radiation levels alone would require completely new protective technology. We would be starting from scratch." "Starting from scratch is what we do best," Webb replied. "Doctor, do you remember what the Council said when we first asked for permission to colonize Perdition's Edge?" Park nodded slowly. "They said it was suicide." "And what did we do?" "We proved them wrong." Webb smiled. "Exactly. We did not just survive on Perdition's Edge. We created an entirely new approach to colonization. We developed technology that now protects millions of humans across dozens of worlds. We did not run from the challenge. We embraced it." He turned back to the galaxy map. "The Council wants us to stop because they are afraid. They have spent millennia building a civilization based on safety, on predictability, on avoiding risk. They do not understand that risk is where humanity thrives." He zoomed in on the galactic core, where the density of dangerous worlds was highest. In 10 years, humanity will have colonies in the core region. In 20 years, we will have established trade routes that bypass council-controlled space entirely. In 50 years, we will be the dominant power in the galaxy, not because we conquered anyone, but because we went where no one else dared to go. Cooper raised his hand again. Sir, what about the council's reaction? If we decline their offer, they might take action against us. Webb considered the question carefully. They might, but consider this, what could they possibly do to us that we have not already done to ourselves? We have survived worlds that kill. We have adapted to environments that destroy. We have turned every obstacle into an opportunity. He paused, letting the words sink in. The council thinks they are offering us a gift, but what they are really offering is a cage. A comfortable cage, certainly. A safe cage, but a cage nonetheless. And humanity did not claw its way up from the mud of Earth, survive ice ages and plagues and disasters, and conquer the harshest worlds in the galaxy just to accept a cage. The room was silent. Every person present understood what Webb was saying. They understood the risks. They understood the challenges. But they also understood something else, something that the Galactic Council had never grasped. Humanity was not just another species. Humanity was something new, something that had never existed before in the history of the galaxy. Humanity was adaptation itself. And adaptation could not be controlled, could not be contained, could not be stopped. It could only be unleashed. The response from the Galactic Council came within hours of humanity's official rejection of their offer. High Chancellor Vorn convened an emergency session. Representatives from every major species gathered in the Great Chamber, their emotions ranging from outrage to fear to grudging admiration. The humans have refused our terms, Vorn announced, his luminous form pulsing with agitation. They have declared their intention to continue expanding into restricted regions of the galaxy. Ambassador Crixtal, whose warnings years ago had gone unheeded, stood to speak. His scales were a deep crimson, the color of barely controlled anger. I warned this council, he said. I told you that giving the humans Perdition's edge was a mistake. I told you that testing them would only make them stronger, and now they have rejected our authority entirely. A massive insectoid representative from the Hive Collective clicked its mandibles. What options do we have? Military action? Crixtal laughed bitterly. Against the humans, have you learned nothing? They survived on Perdition's edge by turning disaster into routine. They colonized the dead zone by treating lethal radiation as just another engineering problem. What do you think they would do if we attacked them? They would adapt, another voice said quietly. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was Elder Mirth, the oldest member of the council. She was a being of pure energy, ancient beyond measure, who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations for longer than most species had existed. They would adapt, she repeated. Just as they always do, we would attack and they would learn from the attack. We would destroy their colonies and they would build new ones in even more hostile locations. We would think we were winning, and all the while we would be training them to become even more dangerous. Vorn drifted closer to Elder Mirth. Then what do you suggest? The ancient being was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of endless years. I suggest that we accept what is happening. I suggest that we stop trying to control the humans and start trying to understand them. Understand them? Crixtal's scales flashed orange. They are primitives. They evolved on a violent, chaotic world. Their entire history is a record of destruction and survival. Yes, Elder Mirth agreed, and that is precisely why they are so remarkable. She floated to the center of the chamber, her energy form expanding until she dominated the space. We have built our civilizations on stability. We have sought worlds that match our needs. We have avoided challenges that might destroy us. And for thousands of years, this approach has worked. Our empires have grown. Our knowledge has expanded. Our species have prospered. She paused, her light dimming slightly. But we have also stagnated. When was the last time any of our species developed truly revolutionary technology? When was the last time we faced a challenge that forced us to fundamentally change? When was the last time we evolved? No one answered. The truth was uncomfortable, but it was undeniable. The humans have been a spacefaring species for barely 2 centuries, Elder Mirth continued. In that time, they have changed more than most of us have changed in millennia. They have faced challenges that would have destroyed us, and they have emerged stronger. They have adapted in ways we cannot even comprehend. She turned to face the assembly directly. This is not a threat to be contained. This is an opportunity to be embraced. The humans are showing us something we had forgotten, that survival is not about avoiding challenges. It is about overcoming them. The chamber fell silent as her words sank in. Finally, Ambassador Crystal spoke. What are you proposing? Elder Mirth's light brightened. I am proposing that we stop trying to control human expansion and start learning from it. I am proposing that we send observers to their colonies, not as spies or enforcers, but as students. I am proposing that we humble ourselves enough to admit that these primitive beings from a violent little world might have something to teach us. And if they refuse, Vorn asked. They will not refuse, Elder Mirth replied. The humans are many things, but they are not petty. They understand the value of cooperation. They understand that sharing knowledge makes everyone stronger. She turned to look at the human delegation who had been sitting quietly throughout the session. Sarah Chen met her gaze and nodded slowly. We will accept your observers, Chen said, standing to address the council. We will share our methods and our technology, but we will not accept restrictions on our expansion. We will not accept limits on our growth, and we will not accept a place in your hierarchy that does not reflect our true capabilities. What place would you accept? Crystal asked, his scales shifting through several colors at once. Chen smiled. It was not a threatening smile, but it was not a submissive one either. We want a partnership, true partnership. We want to work alongside you, not beneath you. We want to combine your knowledge with our adaptability, your stability with our growth, your ancient wisdom with our new perspectives. She paused, looking around the chamber at the representatives of 100 species. We did not come to the stars to conquer. We came to explore, to learn, to grow, but we will not be stopped from that purpose, not by hostile environments, not by deadly worlds, and not by councils that fear change. She took a breath. The galaxy is vast. There is room for all of us. There are challenges enough for everyone. We can face them separately, each species struggling alone. Or we can face them together, combining our strengths, covering each other's weaknesses, achieving things that neither of us could accomplish alone. Chen looked directly at Elder Mirth. You asked what the humans could teach you. Here is your answer. We can teach you to adapt. We can show you how to face challenges instead of avoiding them. We can help you remember what it feels like to grow, to change, to evolve. She spread her hands. That is our offer. Take it or leave it. The chamber was silent. Then slowly Elder Mirth began to pulse with light. It was a signal of approval, the highest honor her species could bestow. One by one, other representatives joined in, not all of them. Some, like Crystal, remained stubbornly resistant, but enough to matter. The Council accepts your offer, High Chancellor Vorn announced formally. A partnership will be established, observers will be exchanged, knowledge will be shared. He paused, and when he spoke again, there was something new in his voice, something that might have been hope. Perhaps the galaxy is ready for a new era, an era not of stagnation but of growth, not of safety but of challenge, not of survival but of adaptation. Chen nodded. Welcome to the future, Chancellor. It is going to be interesting. 10 years later, the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. Human colonies now numbered in the hundreds, spread across worlds that ranged from barely habitable to actively hostile. But the humans no longer worked alone. Representatives from dozens of species had joined them, learning the arts of adaptation that humanity had mastered through millions of years of survival on a chaotic world. On Furnace, the mobile cities now included engineers from the crystalline shard species, who had discovered that their silicon-based biology actually thrived in extreme heat when properly supported. Together, humans and shards had developed technology that allowed settlements to approach closer to the sun than anyone had thought possible. On Glacier Prime, the aquatic delegates had established research stations beneath the ice, combining their expertise in liquid environments with human adaptability to create a thriving underwater civilization. In the Dead Zone, a joint team of humans, Eternals, and several other species had finally cracked the secrets of the exotic matter that made the region so dangerous. What had once been a death trap was now the site of the galaxy's most advanced physics research facility. And at the galactic core, where humanity had once been told they could never go, a new colony was taking shape. General Webb, now retired but still consulted on major decisions, watched the construction remotely from his home on Earth. The colony was called New Horizon, and it represented everything humanity had learned about survival. The structures were modular, capable of reconfiguring within hours to respond to the constantly shifting conditions of the core region. The protective systems incorporated technology from a dozen different species. The colonists themselves were volunteers from across the galaxy, united by a shared commitment to pushing the boundaries of what was possible. A young officer entered Webb's study. "General, we have received confirmation. New Horizons' population has reached 10,000. The colony is officially self-sustaining." Webb nodded slowly, feeling the weight of years in his bones. "How many of them are human?" "About 4,000, sir. The rest are a mix of other species, mostly younger generations who grew up hearing stories about humanity's colonization efforts." "And how are they adapting?" The officer smiled. "Better than we expected, sir. The non-human colonists are learning to embrace challenges instead of avoiding them. They are developing their own adaptation techniques, building on what we taught them but adding their own unique perspectives." Webb turned to look out his window at the night sky. Somewhere out there, impossible things were happening. Species that had never changed were learning to evolve. Civilizations that had stagnated for millennia were beginning to grow. A galaxy that had been divided by fear was slowly uniting around a shared commitment to adaptation. "We did it," he said quietly. "We actually did it." "Did what, sir?" "Showed them what survival through adaptation actually looks like." Webb smiled, remembering the words he had spoken years ago. "We did not just teach them our technology or our methods. We taught them our philosophy. The idea that challenges are opportunities, that failure is just practice for success, that there is no such thing as impossible, only not yet achieved." He turned back to face the officer. "That is what humanity gave the galaxy. Not just the ability to survive in hostile environments, but the willingness to try, the courage to face the unknown, the stubbornness to refuse defeat." The officer nodded. "Some of the other species have started calling it the human way." "Have they?" Webb chuckled. "Well, I suppose that is appropriate, though I prefer a different name." "What name, sir?" Webb looked once more at the stars. "Adaptation," he said simply. "Just adaptation, because that is what we are. That is what we have always been, not the strongest species in the galaxy, not the smartest, not the most advanced, but the most adaptable, the most willing to change, the most determined to survive no matter what." He took a deep breath. "And now, thanks to what we have built, the whole galaxy is learning to adapt. Species that thought they had reached their peak are discovering new potential. Civilizations that thought they had nothing left to learn are finding new questions to ask. A galaxy that thought it understood survival is discovering that survival is just the beginning." He turned away from the window. "That is humanity's legacy, not the colonies we built or the technology we developed. Our legacy is the idea that growth never ends, that challenge is the source of strength, that adaptation is the key to everything." The officer stood in respectful silence for a moment. Then she asked, "What do you think comes next, sir?" Webb considered the question. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance. Somewhere among them, humans and their allies were doing impossible things, going places no one had gone before, becoming something new with every challenge they faced. "I do not know," he admitted finally. "And that is the most wonderful thing of all, because if I could predict what comes next, it would mean we had stopped adapting. It would mean we had found our limits and accepted them." He smiled, and for a moment, he looked almost young again. "But humanity does not accept limits. We never have, we never will. Whatever comes next, we will face it. We will adapt, we will overcome, and then we will find the next challenge and the next forever." He walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold to look back. "That is what survival through adaptation actually looks like," he said. "Not a destination, but a journey, not an ending, but a beginning, not a species that has arrived, but a species that is always becoming." And somewhere across the impossible distances of space, on 100 worlds that should have been uninhabitable, humanity continued to prove him right. Adapting, growing, surviving. Forever.